Hey y'all, welcome to Detoxicity, a show about progressive masculinity. I'm the show's host and producer, Mike Joseph. If you enjoy what you're hearing on the show, I kindly ask that you smash the subscribe button on whichever platform you're using to listen. Also, please don't hesitate to rate, comment, and recommend. If you have someone in your life that could get something out of the conversations we're having here, tell them about the show. Also, feel free to follow me on social media. I'm DetoxPod Guy on Instagram and Tiz Mike Joseph, that is TIS Mike Joseph, on Twitter. You can even email me, detoxpod@gmail.com. Don't hesitate to reach out if you know someone who might be interested in being interviewed on the show, or if you have any other ideas or constructive criticism. Most importantly, I thank you very much for listening. Stay well. Hey folks, this episode features Reid Martin. Reid is the owner of Midcitizen Entertainment, a music company that represents Low Cut Connie, who's Adam Weiner you heard from a few weeks back on this podcast, as well as the amazing Big Freedia, the Grammy-nominated band Tank and the Bangas, and more. Reid is based in New Orleans, a fantastic city, and during our conversation you'll hear why he wants New Orleans to be his base of operation as opposed to more typical music industry cities like New York or Los Angeles. You'll also hear how he gets his boundless energy, how much he hustled to land where he's landed, and you'll also find out how he got the best advice that he's ever gotten at a urinal. So check it out. I'm happy to introduce y'all to Reid Martin.
My name is Reid Martin. I am the co-founder of Midcitizen Entertainment, which is a management company based in New Orleans, where I live, and where my partner Tavia Osby also lives. And awesome. My journey through the music industry started in school. I went to Loyola, New Orleans, which has a music industry program where I studied that in economics, and was fortunate when I was in college. I had an internship very early on, actually my second semester, my freshman year, that turned into a job when I was a sophomore at a PR firm. So I was like an assistant, but I got to do that instead of having to wait tables or anything like that, which I do later on in the story. But yes, so started a band when I was in college as well, graduated during the recession. There just wasn't anything out there. And so my bandmates and I, it was like, screw it. This is what we actually want to do. Let's give it a shot. And I was the singer-songwriter and manager of a band for 3 years after school. And during that time, I worked at the Lowe's Hotel as a server, bartender, runner, you name it. Just learned all the jobs so that when I came back from tour, I could still have a job. And that was from 2009 to late 2012. Probably played 80 to 90 dates a year, was booking the shows. And
That's a lot of responsibility.
I shouldn't have. I should have gotten help. I was like really DIY. And just thought like, I don't need any help, and at that time too, the music industry was in just such dire straits still. Streaming hadn't yet started, but sales had been completely gutted. So at the time, if you were thinking about the music business, was like pure entrepreneurship, just do it yourself. The whole thing, the infrastructure sucks, but we broke up and I entered a pretty dark period, which is a good thing to have happened. So there was one day I went to the Loyola Library, and I might be long-winded and you can edit this down.
It is totally cool. Yeah.
So I got home from like a 2 or 3 month tour, and I was burned out. I saw the writing on the wall that this just wasn't going to keep going. And so I went to the Loyola Library just to like email people on the business side of music that I knew, trying to figure out what was next for me. And so the first email that I send is to the manager of a band in New Orleans called the Soul Rebels. And they're fantastic brass band. And this manager also booked Voodoo Fest. And he had booked my band on Voodoo Fest a couple years prior. So I would take him out to coffee, pick his brain, try and learn some things. And so I'm like, I'll intern, I'll work for cheap. I'm just trying to get back on the business side of music. And he hit me back right away. He's like, yeah, I've got some stuff you could do. So I'm like nowhere even through my second email. And my buddy Mike, who I went to college with, sits down next to me. And, I'm like, what are you doing here? We're both 3 years out of college. He's like, oh, I've been coming here to study for this MBA that I'm doing at UNO. I'm like, all right, cool. He's like, man, I saw this garage on Ferret Street. Somebody needs to do something with it. And I'm like, music venue? He's like, yeah. I'm like, well, let's go check it out. Why not us? So I don't send the second email. We go down Ferret Street, which is the street near the universities, and we check it out. We make friends with the landlord, and we spend the next 4 days hustling a business plan together. And the long story, he gives it to a Korean barbecue restaurant. And Mike had been throwing shows at his house, like, again, DIY touring bands, like in his backyard. And hours after the landlord had called this Korean barbecue restaurant to say, hey, the lease is yours if you have the money by this time, these girls walk by. They're like, oh, this is the place that Mike's going to be doing shows, and he's just like, God, I don't know why I believe in these guys. So he calls the restaurant back. He's like, sorry, I have to put this on hold. Calls us. He's like, if you can get me first and last month's rent by the end of the week, the place is yours. I don't know why, but we're just like, shit. So it's busy season bartending at this hotel in downtown New Orleans. So I've got $4,000 in my checking account, and we need $3,600 to pay the first and last month's rent. And so I roll the dice. I drain my bank account, which again, $4,000, a lot to a 25-year-old. But I also know that I can make it back in a few days, just working at the bar during the season that it was in New Orleans.
Sure.
So then we have a month to figure out how we're going to do a venue and finance it and everything. And never do that. Never do that.
Words of caution.
Never do that.
Holy shit.
My partner Mike's landlord owned like 70 properties, was the son of a Texas oil baron, and had just FU money. But he was the only rich person that we knew. And he was kind of young. And so he was like, yeah, I'll do it. And so we got this horrible deal where we were paying both debt and gave him equity in the place. And it hamstrung the whole thing. By the way, the venue's called Gasa Gasa. It still exists. We sold it during the pandemic. When we sold it, I only had 1% ownership in it at that point. More on that. I never owned more than 5% because my $3,600 was my only financial contribution.
Gotcha.
The new owners are doing a phenomenal job, but it wound up becoming like a Bowery booked venue, which then became an AEG booked venue. So it's a 200 cap room, and it's actually a pretty reputable room in New Orleans. But after we'd gotten that off the ground, it was not big enough for me to actually stay on day to day. It was a small operation. And so I took my 5%, and I'm just like, I'm going to keep doing this stuff. I'm an entrepreneur now. This is my new thing. So I tried something a lot bigger at this dilapidated bowling alley that hadn't been refurbished since Katrina and was still like blighted, and tried to do something a lot bigger. And let's just say I failed. Wound up in anywhere from like $10,000 to $12,000 in high interest bank debt. Just took out loans at all the different banks in town on the same day. So $5,000 from Whitney, $2,000 from Shell Credit Union, stuff like that. And all for like deposits and earnest money and inspections and shit like that. And it's a Walmart now. So that's really when I got kind of depressed. And I moved to a place where my rent was $250 a month, which is, you can imagine, wasn't the best part of town.
I don't want to imagine. Holy crap.
And I got a real estate license and a job as a business broker, which is like if, the local coffee shop or the gas station that's owned by mom and pop on the corner wants to sell, you confidentially try and find a buyer for them. So it's just like little Main Street businesses. So it's doing real estate, but for businesses. And I was terrible at it. I'm probably 26 at the time, looked like I was 19 still. And these are 65-year-old men that have worked at the same pizza shop their entire life and think it's worth way more than it actually is. Like,
sure,
this is their retirement plan. And who's this schmo telling them, sorry, your thing's only worth $70,000, not $250,000? But I learned how to have conversations in a more substantive way and try and sound authoritative by doing that. But it was all commission. I sucked at it. I still had to bartend at night. So I'd go to my 9 to 5 with my suit on during the day. And then I'd go, I was working at a couple different bars, still the hotel, but then a couple other spots. But in the background this whole time, I'm working for this manager for $10 an hour. I shit you not, like when Yo Gabba Gabba was coming to town and he was the promoter for it, I'm at like the family event at the zoo during Halloween, like in the parking lot, putting Yo Gabba Gabba flyers on cars. And I'm 25 or 26 years old doing what I was doing when I was 18 at Loyola. And I graduated in a fairly high position in the class too. And I'm like, fuck, what am I doing? But the tour manager for the Soul Rebels started wanting some time off. And so I had been on the road, and this manager's like, hey, do you want to go out with the guys in 3 weeks? Like, we need a different TM, and you've been out there. I'm like, cool. And so I started becoming the Soul Rebels B team tour manager. And then within 2 months, that tour manager stepped down. And so the gig was mine for the taking. And I was slowly starting to come out of that debt by living super cheap and having way too many jobs. And so somewhere along the lines, I'm able to move out of my place. Some really bad shit was happening on my block, but I move out of that place. I am now the Soul Rebels full-time tour manager, so I stopped business brokering. And so I enter an actually incredible period of my life where I used to say that I was retired.
Okay.
So there would be years where the Soul Rebels would go to Europe 4 times. There was a year where we hit every continent except Antarctica. And I got paid to do it. And then when I was in town, I had scaled back my service industry work just back to the hotel that I'd always been at, which was, at that point, I was so comfortable in it. And I'm like, I live in New Orleans and work at a bar that's easy. I don't sweat it. And I get paid to travel. Like, I do literally what people do when they retire.
That's the dream.
But during that kind of dark period for like a year, I really did work 7 days a week. And my body, I think, had internalized that. So somewhere along the lines, my ambition got the better of me. And I saw this band, this was in 2014, this band called Sweet Crude playing at Gasa Gasa. And they just absolutely blew me away. And I knew all the people in the band, because when you're in your mid to late 20s and you were in a band, most of those bands have broken up. Maybe one has gone on and stayed together and has found success. But then the musicians that break up, you either break up and you go do something completely different. You do what I did, which was get on the business side. Or if it's the only thing you know, then you start another band or another artist career, and you know just how good you actually have to be this time. And that was Sweet Crude. When I saw them, they blew me away. So I stalked them for several months until they relented and let me be their manager. And the truth is, even up to this point, most of my skills as a manager come from mistakes that I made trying to do it myself as a musician. But it was having kind of this Gasa card under my belt, but really the Soul Rebels. Like, the Soul Rebels were a professional operation, still are.
Right.
And I got to see that, like, you know, from like the DIY level to like this mid-level indie band level, which is what the Soul Rebels would be at, who are making a living playing music and music only. There's obviously differences, but there's so much that's the same. The same way that things obviously change if you're in arenas, but there are things that you think about that you're just thinking about on a different scale.
Sure.
So that made me think like, oh, it's weird. I never thought, oh, I'm going to be a manager. I saw Sweet Crude and I'm like, I have the experience to do this. I actually think that I can be of service and that I can help here. And it turns out that that was a thing that New Orleans needed. We constantly have this conversation where New Orleans has some of the best music in the world, which is absolutely true. It actually has the best music in the world per capita.
I'd be inclined to agree with you there.
Yeah. There's a really robust live music infrastructure here because we have so many festivals and so many events all the time. I mean, every weekend there's at least like a street fest going on.
Sure.
Tons of venues. So we definitely turn out a lot of tour managers and a lot of people in the production and events world, but we don't have any labels, management companies, agencies, publishing companies, kind of the desk job side of the music industry.
Sure.
That really supports artists. Like, as artists grow here, whether they're Trombone Shorty or the Revivalists, or name an artist that has broken out in New Orleans recently, typically their management and their agent and their label are LA, Nashville, New York, somewhere outside of New Orleans, which is fine, totally fine. But those commission dollars go elsewhere. And so one of the things when I was considering like, oh, I want to manage and I've got this one client, should I try and get a job at a management firm and move? Or, you know, so the thing is like, even in 2014, the conversation that I just told you about, like how we've got great music, but no music business infrastructure. It was a thing. And I'm like, all right, I'm going to stay in New Orleans. I'm going to try and be a part of this solution. And still trying, we're about to pass some really great tax credit legislation that allows music industry companies to move down and get 10% of their payroll refunded. So
awesome.
You know, I guess the point is I start managing acts. And so one of the artists that Sweet Crude's playing with all the time is a band called Tank and the Bangas. And they have a manager and had a manager at the time, Tavia Osby. And she managed the band from the start. She convinced Tank to start a band. So we just start working together because we each have our own artists that we manage. We're under like this common branding umbrella, but like all my commissions are going to me. All her commissions are going to her.
Okay.
And so in 2015, I got the chance I knew Big Freedia's attorney. Freedia's attorney, his first client out of law school was my band.
Oh, wow.
So
small
it
world.
all comes back around somehow.
That's right.
Yeah, I have a lot of unpaid legal bills to that guy still. So Freedia had a management contract that was expiring on September 1st of 2015. And Freedia's team knew in January of that year that it was not going to get renewed. So luckily I got asked because I'd started managing artists and there wasn't anybody really in New Orleans that was doing it that much. So they're like, we need a manager that's in New Orleans for Freedia. That's what Freedia needs. I probably had 5 interviews with Freedia over the course of the spring and summer of 2015. And I just was out with the Soul Rebels one time, got a call from that lawyer and it's like, Freedia's made a decision and you got the gig. And I'm just like, holy shit.
Hey.
Yeah. So I started managing Freedia in 2015. And that allowed me to transition out of tour managing the Soul Rebels. Yeah, I guess I didn't explain how like I'm bartending at night during the weekdays, managing my artists during the daytime hours, and then I'm on the road with the Soul Rebels on the weekends.
How does that even work? Like, how do you do that without cocaine?
My Instagram handle is little kid with lots of energy.
I was about to mention that. Like,
I actually can't drink have any stimulants above green tea. Like
wow.
Cocaine, coffee, Coca-Cola. I mean, I've got enough energy as it is.
Where does that come from?
8 hours of sleep. I will do horrible things to people if I don't sleep for 8 hours.
Duly noted.
Yeah. So like if I'm on a gig till 1:30 in the morning, then I'm like, all right, I'm setting an alarm for 9:30. I'm going to be in this bed for 8 hours. Obviously that doesn't work all the time, but okay. But I did start to reach a point where I was generating enough commissions where I was able to scale back the bartending work. And somewhere before I signed Freedia, I was able to just be managing and tour managing. Like the Soul Rebels had become the consistent income. And so, I signed Freedia as a client. I stopped tour managing. I phased that out over the next like 5 to 6 months. And I'm just a manager. Somehow this little side hustle became my job. So that was awesome. And then like a year later, a little bit over a year later, Tank and the Bangas win the Tiny Desk contest.
Right.
And Tavia and I were still working together. And then all of a sudden, it's like every agent and their mom was calling, every label and their mom was calling. And so we just started flying around the country trying to figure out how we were going to build out Tank's team. They still would have gotten to where they are today because they're incredible.
Absolutely.
But they got struck by lightning. But they were, granted, 7 years in. Like Freedia had been gigging like just a madman for 10 to 11 years before it started to turn over for Freedia. Right. And it does generally take about a decade, barring getting struck by lightning, which Tank and the Bangas did. And so that's when Tavi and I were just like, I'll put in my Freedia, you put in your Tank, and we put ourselves on salary to ourselves to like a level that we could sustainably live, but was less than what we would make if we were just taking in our commissions.
Sure.
And then we hired and started signing more acts. And that when we combined that and did that, that's what Midcitizen Entertainment is. The official start date of Midcitizen Entertainment was January 1 of 2018, which brings us more or less kind of where we are now. Yeah. We do Tank and the Bangas, Big Freedia, The Suffers from Houston, Texas, Sin Kane from Brooklyn by way of Sudan, Low Cut Connie from Philadelphia, Sweet Crude in New Orleans, Chawa in New Orleans, Alfred Banks in New Orleans. And then we've got other projects that are based down here, Sax Kicks Ave, Alexis and the Samurai. I think we've got a really fucking dope roster. I'm proud of it. And we're selective about the things we sign. We sign artists that we think can still do it when they're 65 and have something unique to say. And that's kind of the guiding light.
Amen to that. I gotta ask, so many questions have sort of popped into my head during the time that you were talking, beyond just the fact that, like, holy shit, you have a lot of energy. One thing that is really interesting to me with your artists is the fact that they are so unique. And it's like, you're not looking for the next cookie cutter, like, teen pop star. You're not looking for the next, mumble rapper or whatever. What is it in you that is like, I want to, because Big Freedia is to middle America a challenging artist. Tank and the Bangas, I think, just because of the way they meld genres, is a challenging artist. Even Low Cut Connie is sort of a challenging artist. What is it about you that either attracts or, purposefully goes out to look for these folks who have things very unique to say?
Yeah. First off, I am just into music. That is, I love pop music. I love a good hook. So our acts do tend to make fairly catchy music.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. But, I would say a couple things. First off, with Sweet Crude being our first client, they sing in half Louisiana French. And they have a very unique story in the sense that Alexis Marceau, the lead singer of the band, her grandfather used to get punished in school for speaking French. Like, that was their native language. But in between the two world wars, like, there was French in Louisiana, there was a big nationalist push. And the French in Louisiana got this stigma the way Spanish has in the US now. Like, everybody speak English. That's right.
Right.
So the road signs were changed. You couldn't have French in schools anymore, that sort of thing. And they had this very interesting way that it was its own language that really descended from the Acadians in Canada, which we just call Cajuns in Louisiana. And so essentially this, like, with their parents' generation, this language disappeared. And it was the native language of all of these people, white, black, everything that lived in Louisiana. And so they took it upon themselves to relearn it and learn it the way it was spoken. And instead of making music in like Zydeco or Cajun that still uses that language, they love that kind of music, of course. But it's like they wanted to make modern music that is inspired by South Louisiana, but also appeals to them. And I've just found it, like, literally this band has a moat around it. No one is going to do this exact thing.
Right.
And so there's a ceiling. You cannot go any further. But also, it's inherently interesting art. And I would much rather, as a business person, A, represent something that I'm very passionate about and has meaning to the culture, to wherever it's from.
Sure.
But B, I just don't want to sign like again, there's a lot of music that I love that sounds like a lot of other things. If I just sign the next big pop star that needs to go onto a major label and it's just about just ramming it through the system with a bunch of money, I literally don't know how to play that game. I don't have the contacts for it or anything. But what I found was, if I can represent something that musically is meaningful and culturally meaningful, that is enough to get people to talk. Word of mouth is the most important thing. So it is a business decision too, as much as it is about my personal taste. But I do like to represent things that are a challenge. It's fun.
That's awesome. You seem to have gotten a lot of where you've gotten through just knowing other people who are sort of doing things that you can pitch in on. Like, how important has networking and staying in touch with contacts and being that person who's like, hey, remember me? Like, how important is that?
Extremely. So when I started tour managing the Soul Rebels, that is when I realized, okay, I have something legitimate that I can kind of latch onto. So if the band was playing in Los Angeles or New York, I would ask the manager to just fly me home 3 days later. I'll pay my own way. I'll make sure the band is checked in at the airport. Everything's good. But then after they get on a flight and everybody's back in New Orleans, everything's cool anyway. So it's like, I'm going to stay. And the one person in New York that I know that I feel like might be able to connect me with other people will help me connect with other people. And it's just kind of built that way. And so then once I signed Sweet Crude, So this is in 2015. This is before Frida. I'm up in New York for APAP, and Offbeat magazine put Sweet Crude on the cover, and then the next month they put Tank and the Bangas on the cover. And I'm trying to schedule as many meetings as I can. Both of these bands are very much local acts at the time, but they're buzzing. These are like, look, they're on the cover of this magazine that matters in South Louisiana.
Right.
And I remember going to ICM, like pitching, I'm like, all right, Sweet Crude just signed with High Road, but Tank and the Bangas don't have an agent yet. And they're like, all right. I'm like, they're opening for such and such at the Brooklyn Bowl tonight. You got to go. This band's going to blow you away. Trying to get people to do that. I was a nobody, but I was able to get in the door. But a lot of people still didn't go to the shows. And I was saying, you got to go see this. I put myself out there as much as I can. But then, like, obviously signing Frida, like, people will then, like,
start paying attention,
take you seriously a little bit. But then when Tank blew up, because I had pitched them to so many people, I got several phone calls. Anything that you want me to sign from here on out, I'm going to sign. So that really, in tennis, there's a phrase that you're only as good as your second serve. And artist management, or in anything where you're representing artists, you're only as good as your artist.
That makes sense.
You've got to put in the hustle. But if I'm not signing something that I think is awesome, that when I do finally get the person out to the show to see the band or to see, whoever it is, like, I know that my artist is going to deliver. So I'm only signing acts that I know they're going to blow anybody away. And I feel like I see an artist like that once a year. And for me, it's live. I love live music so much. And I know that Spotify numbers matter and Instagram followers matter. But the metric that I give a shit about is ticket sales. I live in a city which has the best live music.
Right.
I see it all the time. So if I get blown away, then I'm just like, oh shit, I've got to sign this. I remember seeing Low Cut Connie in 2018. It was November of 2018. They were playing a sold out show at Gasa Gasa. I went there with Frida's A&R. We were having a writing camp, and it was Dante Ross, if you know Dante.
I know Dante. I mean, I know of Dante Ross. I wish I knew Dante Ross.
So Dante and I go down to Gasa Gasa, and like, it's just one of those moments where I'm just like, I was sad because this is the best show I've seen in years, and I don't manage this band. And turns out they invited me to the show because the manager of the time was looking to partner up with a management company. And we wound up winning that whole battle royale. They wanted to be with something small and everything else. And we just sold out Bowery Ballroom today, by the way.
Awesome.
The show's in December.
That's crazy.
I mean, they're a freak show. And even though it's just down the middle, old school rock and roll, Adam is Freddie Mercury. I had no idea. Like, he's so androgynous. He's so captivating. He loves everyone, and he makes everybody in that room, like, just the wave of acceptance that comes over everybody. It's a feeling like no other. And you become a believer. You become a member of this church. So, again, artists like that who have something like Low Cut Connie is, I mean, I hope they have a hit, but it doesn't matter. Adam can do this till he is 70 years old if he wants to. We'll follow him to the grave.
Right. With all that you have going on, what is your work-life balance? Obviously, the 8 hours of sleep is important, but how does Reid turn it down? Because you can't be the manager, the hustler, the music guy 24/7 without getting burned out at some point.
Totally. And I have gotten burned out every once in a while, especially during the pandemic. It's been hard.
Sure.
But I'm fortunate that I love my job and I derive energy from my job. I'm also fortunate that there's a lot of perks when there's not a pandemic. I travel a lot and I still enjoy traveling, and I enjoy live music. So I go see as many of our artist shows as I can. And I'm also, pretty social in here in New Orleans. Luckily, we're in a place where no one gives a shit about what you do. People kind of care more so about how you celebrate your life. Like, what Mardi Gras crew are you in, or things like that. I don't have to tell people that I'm an artist manager of some big New Orleans acts. Like, it comes up. But like, it's so New Orleans, like, you can't be that much of a, like, I'm fortunate, like, I'm in like the top 10% of people in terms of the amount that I work in the city, but it's 4:00 in the afternoon here. the movers and shakers in town, if you will, or whatever, maybe, supposedly. But they're starting drinking at 4 o'clock. You know? So I guess it's a little bit arrogant, but I do believe that per capita and for the price you pay, New Orleans has, there's downsides to it like there is to every city. Sure. But it's got the best food, it's got the best music, and people, it just moves slow. It's swampy, it's hot, and
I can vouch for that. It is.
Yeah. So anyway, I don't have a tried and true method. I do meditate a lot, I journal a lot, I try and keep a morning routine, but I will say I don't kick myself like I used to if I don't meditate or do yoga or something like that. Like I used to be like, I gotta do these self-improvement things. If I feel good, awesome. But if I feel anxious, then yeah, I'm going to do like a 15-minute emergency yoga session. Look, I get off balance like anybody else.
Sure.
And that's just something constant set of discovery. I've had a therapist for the last 3 years, which has been amazing. We meet every couple of weeks via phone. And again, my tactics change as my needs change.
As that should probably be for everybody. I mean, the same method doesn't necessarily work for everybody all the time. But I do think it's super important to have something in your back pocket, particularly when you're a pretty high-functioning fellow. So I would imagine that unless you have good self-care methods, that could spin out of control really, really quickly.
Yeah, it can, and it has.
No.
So, which we can detail if you want, but...
Yeah. Do you know what you would be doing if you didn't do what you are doing now?
Man, I'm really grateful that I'm in the situation I'm in. I have 2 older brothers, so family of all guys, who I grew up in Kansas City. I moved to New Orleans a week before Katrina. I've got great time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Holy shit.
But they have wonderful families and stable jobs and the whole nine in Kansas City. And I knew that life, somewhere, when I made the decision after college to play in a band, something switched in my brain to where it's like, I can do this. Like, I didn't think that, just in the way that I figured I would have to go get a stable job, get married, have kids, like check all the boxes. And when I made that decision, I realized I didn't die. Like, you jump and the net will appear. And I've fallen pretty far before the nets appeared a few times, but that's also been really instructive. So, I mean, look, like if there were times during the pandemic, when our business completely flopped for several months where I was considering when restaurants and bars were like opening in some ways, like, should I like go get a shift or something? Like, it doesn't matter if Big Freedia's manager has to go like do whatever in a pandemic to make it work. Right. And so that's been helpful too. Just having moments in my life where I've been pretty humbled. I don't know. Yeah. So to be honest, I literally have no clue what I do. I have no clue.
Obviously you didn't have the whole vision right away, but you stayed the course. And, I don't know if there was necessarily an easy fallback option, but you had in your head like an idea of what a fallback option looked like, whether it be settling down or getting out of New Orleans. But you were like, screw it, I'm going to figure out a way to do what I'm going to do. And then you ended up doing it.
Yeah. Again, I'm very blessed. That's all I kind of can say. I mean, yeah, there was hard work and everything, but there's so much in my life where I thought I was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Like, how am I a 27-year-old guy that I thought I studied really hard and did everything right, and all of my friends are, leap years ahead of me or working at this thing or whatever. It turns out I was in the right place at the right time the whole time. I mean, even down to managing Freedia. Like, my band, it in some ways looks like a failure because we didn't make it in the standard sense, but I met our attorney who represented Freedia, and I learned so much that has been valuable to me. So I've been really blessed in that way. And I still am constantly learning a lot and getting to know more people too.
Amen to that.
Yeah.
With the management stuff, one interesting thing is I've been having a lot of conversations. Like, I'm part of this. It's not really a therapy group, but it's sort of similar for TMs and roadies. And I speak to a lot of people, and just from being in the industry as long as I have, being a tour manager is kind of like being a psychiatrist almost, because artists are mercurial people and they, have their kind of odd ways, and creativity can be kind of a weird thing, and success and fame and all that stuff. How do you manage the mental health of your artists and make sure your artists are cool while also still making sure that Reid is cool and you're not sacrificing like your own sanity at the expense of other people?
Man, this is a fantastic question.
Thank you.
So there's a few facets to this question, to this answer. When I was in a band and I was in my early 20s, and also I should say when I was a server during that time too, whenever there was catastrophe, whether it was at the restaurant or on tour, I mean, you see my energy, like that can get channeled, and like that wasn't channeled appropriately. I'd be like just panicking, and every time the world wouldn't end. And so when I started tour managing the Soul Rebels, same thing. Like we had 2 minivans on hold and they don't have minivans, like Reid pacing, biting his fingernails, pulling his hair out, freaking out, having a trombone player miss a flight to Australia. And also that business broker job too, where like I was dealing with people's hopes and dreams and having to figure that out. So I would like to think that I'm a fairly empathetic person. And the way that manifested itself earlier in my life, and I'm only 34 right now, so it's still early days.
Young buck.
Yeah, earlier and younger than I am now, it manifests itself by me like trying to like just immersing myself almost too much in the other person's shoes, or just like too much in like the world is crashing down. But luckily I've been in that situation in every different form so many times that I'm able to, like, for my current tour managers, coach them like everything's fine. Like it doesn't matter that the flight's canceled. Everything's fine. We're going to figure this out. I do. So with the managers that work underneath Tavia and I at Midcitizen too, like people like are just like, holy shit, this is going wrong. Like we're chill. Like I am between being in so many catastrophic situations, and I say catastrophic, like work catastrophic,
sure,
not actual catastrophic. And also just being in therapy and like learning about my side of the street, as my therapist calls it, staying kind of in my center. That has really helped me with my artists, because as a tour manager, you're one kind of psychologist. It's really in the moment. It is acute level stress. It's much more like being a server or a bartender where things happen right then. And so luckily I've had that same mental experience from that, which is an analog to tour management. But as a manager, things get a lot deeper in the sense that you're truly managing the hopes and dreams of your artists, who are inherently insecure people, because the supply of available music dramatically outstrips the demand and the dollars available for those artists to make a living, right?
Yeah.
So you're always at risk of like getting to here and then coming back down. So to get to a place where an artist is comfortable in their core and just trust their art takes a little bit. And so I am very fortunate in that aspect, because I have had that insecurity deeply. And my band broke up. I didn't make it. I failed. And I didn't die. And I manage artists that were far bigger than I ever was as an artist, but I still can relate to the feelings of being an artist and being insecure about that fact. Because it's like, if you're a plumber, if you're a bartender, if you're an accountant, like if I messed up somebody's drink order at the bar, that's not reflecting on me personally. If I get a drink order right and somebody's like, this is the best thing ever, it feels great, but there's some distance between me and the work.
Sure.
And so what I work on with my artists is trying to create that same distance, because even though these are your lyrics and this is you, you are still, and not to humanize like how amazing the service is, but you are still providing a service. And if you play a bad show, if you have a reaction to a song that you didn't expect, or if you're reading too many comments, you got to distance yourself from the work a little bit. And so I work with my artists on that psychologically. Let's put in the work. Let's do the best thing we can. Know that we put it out there. And man, like sometimes people really misinterpret what artists are saying.
Oh yeah.
And that it can be really hurtful. I mean, look, I'm not going to, this podcast is going to air after, but Freedia has a huge day tomorrow. Lady Gaga is announcing the 10-year anniversary of the album Born This Way.
Right.
And putting out a deluxe edition in June. And we're here talking here in May. They're announcing that album with one single before it comes out. And it's Freedia's version of Judas.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, it's amazing. It's Freedia's biggest musical moment up to this point because
right.
The cover of Judas slapped. But B, Gaga's whole, some elements of Freedia's fan base, like Freedia is very Christian himself. And by the way, Freedia doesn't care about pronouns. I'll go between me and her constantly.
I've read that Freedia is not a big pronoun person.
Yeah, Freedia identifies as a gay man, but just does not care. But anyways, there will be elements of Freedia's fan base that's pretty religious that may not understand that like Freedia's interpretation of the song Judas is about being scorned by a lover that you just can't quit, right. Which is what, essentially the song is, and Freedia relates to it and just made a banging version of it. 90% of our fans are going to just be here for it and think it's so empowering that this Black gay artist is taking it and we made it super New Orleans. There's a bounce beat. There's horns all over it. It's so cool. One element of our fan base is going to be like Illuminati or like Freedia's is doing Antichrist stuff.
Sure.
We can't control that. But I know Freedia's worried about it. And at the end of the day, you've got to be able to create some distance. This is important art that is being made, or important in the sense that like it's going to have an impact on people. And it's contributing to the greater good. And if somebody gets mad at it, what can you do?
That's so be it. So be it, man. Yeah. I gotta ask. I haven't brought my standard last question out for a while, but I feel like it's appropriate to close out this conversation. What is the best piece of advice you've ever gotten?
Oh man. Okay. This is so random, but actually like. Okay, so in my early 20s, I was out on a Sunday night at this music venue called DBA. And it's one of the best venues in New Orleans. If the listeners listening to this podcast are down in New Orleans anytime soon, if they've been, they probably know it, but it's on Frenchman Street, and which has gotten fairly touristy over the years, but DBA keeps it 100 by charging covers and having great New Orleans bands in there that get paid. So I'm in DBA on a Sunday night. I'm probably 23 years old. I was at like a pool party earlier in the day. I've been going at it all day, and I'm with a couple friends. And I go to the bathroom, and there's two urinals. This old man starts peeing next to me. And like about 10 seconds into both of us peeing, he turns to me and he's like, "Do you have any regrets?" And I'm just like, "Oh God, whoa. Do you have any regrets in your life?" And I'm just like, "No, man, but like I'm 23." And he's like, "That's good. I do." And this guy's probably 70 years old. And I'm like, "Look, man, by the time I'm your age, I'm certain I will." He's like, "You probably will. But I know people my age that don't. And you should be one of those people." And he walked out. And I'm just like, holy shit.
That's one of those like weird, like you almost feel like it's a movie scene, right? Like somebody walks in, like drops the advice bomb right there and then just strolls the fuck out.
Sunday night at 9:30 p.m. in a bathroom in downtown New Orleans.
You never know when the inspiration's going to come, man.
But it stuck with me. It stuck with me. So I've never, I've had bosses, of course. I've had to work for other people to pay bills. But in my main pursuit in life, I've always wanted to be fairly entrepreneurial. And so I've kept that as a North Star. Like, all right, whatever I'm going to do, I'm going to wind up being my own boss. And luckily I've gotten there. And that dude in that bathroom really like helped me stay on course.
The things that you can learn while taking a piss. Thank you, Reid, for taking the time out of your schedule to chat. We shoved a lot into 40 minutes, and this is one of those situations in which I would love there to be a part two, because there was a fair amount of stuff that we didn't cover. Actually, I feel like I could do a part two with just about everybody that I've interviewed for this podcast so far. So if you're listening and you want there to be a part two, hit me up. Whether you were a guest and you want to talk again, or you're a listener and you want to follow up on some of the conversations we've had before, hit me up. My socials and all that stuff, you've got all the information. Reid's artists are all great. Make sure you check out their music and follow them on socials. You can follow Reid himself on Instagram at Little Kid with Lots of Energy, which might be one of the most true-to-life IG handles in existence. Thanks again for listening to this episode. We really hope that you stick around and listen to future episodes or past episodes if you feel so inclined. You can obviously listen to Detoxicity on the podcast platform of your choosing. And if you want to get in touch with me, please hit me up on Instagram at DetoxPodGuy, Twitter, TizMikeJoseph, or you can email me at detoxpod@gmail.com. Always willing to hear constructive criticism, thoughts, ideas, realizations, and if you yourself would like to be a guest on the show, or you know somebody who would make a good guest, I will take recommendations from now until the end of time, so please feel free to reach out to me. I want to thank a couple of people who've been very important to this show. Calvin Williams composed the music that you hear at the beginning and end of every episode. Jacob Block composed the logo, or created the logo, for the show. And I want to give a special shout out to Andrew Grossman and Jeff Giles for providing inspiration for me to come up with this idea and bring it to fruition. Once again, thank you all for listening. I really, really appreciate it, and take care of yourselves. Peace.